It is the year 325 AD in what is now modern Turkey. The Emperor Constantine has declared that all Christian bishops are to gather to discuss doctrine. Well, now, I don't know if this is the way that they dressed, but then again, I don't know if this way isn't dressed. I'm sure Constantine had great pomp, and the bishops, of course, we know how they like to dress up. So 325 AD was the year of the First Ecumenical Council, better known as the Council of Nicaea. It was one of 7 ecumenical councils that would go throughout and be completed by about the 8th century AD. And this is the council that some say, well, we got this, the Bible, or at least the 27 books of the New Testament, the list of all the biblical books that everyone was to accept, that Emperor Constantine declared, this is it, and all the other books be done away with. The only problem? Didn't happen at all. The whole idea that the canon, the list of books of the Bible, was produced and finalized at the Council of Nicaea was most recently taught by Dan Brown. You know, the guy that wrote the Da Vinci Code. Now, I read the Da Vinci Code and I thoroughly enjoyed the story, but the history behind it was as much fiction as the fictional story was. I also watched the movie, which is interesting. I mean, is anything with Tom Hanks ever boring? No. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go into a long diatribe about the evils of Dan Brown, because really the question is, where in the world did he get this nonsense? First of all, let's talk about what really happened at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. Emperor Constantine called the council because, well, he wanted the church to be thoroughly unified on doctrine. So, he could turn his attention to more important things like peace and prosperity without a bunch of bishops bickering in the back of him. So he ordered all the bishops to what is today Turkey to get their act together. The main topic at the council was the Arian controversy. Now, Arius of Alexandria had been teaching that Christ was not divine, but that he was a created being. Basically taught the Son of God had a beginning, and that he did not have an eternity, and that that he did not have the same true divinity that the Father had. But instead he was only made God by the Father's permission and power, and the Son of God was first and foremost the most perfect of God's creation. Now this was declared a heresy by the council, who said the true doctrine about the Son, taught by Scripture, is that the Son was true God, co-eternal with the Father, and begotten of his same substance. They said this is what the apostles taught, and what had been codified in Scripture. And they expressed this belief in the words of the Nicene Creed. Now, the Nicene Creed taught that Jesus is light of light and true God of true God, that he's begotten, not born. In other words, he didn't have a beginning. He wasn't born or created, but he was begotten. A word that's hard to understand, kind of means eternally generated. But most importantly, he was of one substance with the Father. In other words, equally God. Now, legend has it, this debate got pretty heated at one point, and so Arius was actually punched in the face by Santa Claus. Nicholas of Myra, who later was canonized as Saint Nicholas, the guy behind the myth of Santa Claus. When Santa Claus is taking swings at you, well, you're probably going to get a lump of coal in your stocking for Christmas. Now, pretty much every church historian agrees that Nicholas did not punch Arius. But hey, it makes a good story, right? Although probably not one you want to tell your children on Christmas Eve before they go to bed. Yeah. Council also is said to have developed how we set the date of Easter. Now, that's in a nutshell what happened in AD 325. So how did the setting of the canon, or the books of the Bible, find its way into the story? There's this idea that under Constantine, a few elite bishops put a list of biblical books together that suited their purposes, and it was voted on and agreed to by the council, and all the other books were thrown out. That it was all about politics. The problem is there's nothing, absolutely nothing, in the historical writings of people that were at that council and reports of that indicate that the Bible was ever talked about the list of the books of the Bible. Several writers produced reports of it. Eusebius, The writer of the Church Histories, which is very well respected, doesn't mention a thing about it. In fact, reports indicate just the opposite happened at the council. So where does this idea come from? Did Dan Brown invent this? Well, the idea actually comes from a 9th century manuscript, literally 600 years after the council. It's written 600 years later. And this is called the Synodicon Vetus, which talks about the first 7 councils. Now, the manuscript was bought in the 16th century by Andreas Durmanus. And he edited and published it. And he was published by John Pappas in 1601 in Strasbourg. Here's what it actually says when it's translated into English. The council made manifest the canonical and apocryphal books of the Bible in the following manner. Placing them side by side of the divine table in the house of God, they prayed, entreating the Lord that the divinely inspired books might be found on the table and the spurious ones underneath, and it so happened. So even according to this source, Constantine, the bishops, had nothing to do with it. In fact, it was a result of a miracle that occurred at that council. So they say. Now this document circulated and found its way, bizarrely enough, into works of Voltaire, who in volume 3 of his philosophical dictionary writes, "It was by an expedient nearly similar that the fathers by the same council distinguished the authentic from the apocryphal books of Scripture. Having placed them all together upon the altar, the apocryphal books fell to the ground by themselves." Miracle. This is where Dan Brown got the substance of his false information, and of course further expanded it, and along with other people, that somehow Constantine had political motivations, the church had political motivations. The fact is the canon was discussed and largely developed before the council ever happened. And there were also many ongoing discussions after the council, still trying to put that together. The fact is the Council of Nicaea was simply about the Arian controversy and a few other things, and the establishment of the Nicene Creed to counter that Arian controversy. The votes in favor of the creed and the condemning of Arianism were overwhelming. It wasn't like anywhere close to being even. It was also a very clear statement of the Orthodox faith of the Christian church. So the Arian controversy, though, now would not go away. It continued to come back. There would be fights back and forth in church forever on it. In fact, it still exists today in cultic groups such as Mormonism and other groups. So that's the council, what happened in 325 AD. But speaking of Mormonism, next week we're going to be discussing the TV series The Chosen, which is produced by a production company studio in Provo, Utah, which is owned by Mormons. So is The Chosen something that Christians should watch? We'll discuss that next week. Peace out.